We talked this morning about student learning. We talked about teacher practices. So now we're going to talk about teacher learning. My name is Cassie Haig, and I'm really delighted to be moderating this session on putting creativity and research at the heart of teacher learning. This morning we heard that 60 to 70% of students reported that their teachers value their creativity and encourage them to come up with original ideas, and that that's associated with slightly better performance in creative thinking. That seems to me to be quite a positive finding. But we also heard that more needs to be done to support teachers and schools to foster student creative thinking. And we really saw an illustration of that. I've been talking to people around what they found kind of most surprising and interesting, and several people have mentioned that high level of variability in creative thinking, both across schools and within schools. We know from an earlier system-level questionnaire of PISA jurisdictions that one of the major barriers and challenges of implementing creative thinking in the curriculum is a lack of professional learning for teachers. So I work here at the OECD, and we work on a project that works with educators, including teacher educators, to develop and trial practical resources to support teachers to foster and to assess creativity and critical thinking, in fact. And as part of that work, we recently produced a draft professional learning framework, and that's kind of full of really practical activities to support teachers to reflect on what it might mean to integrate more creative thinking for students into their practice. And that involves them evaluating and adapting some of the resources that we've produced as part of the project and designing their own resources. And I say that it's a draft professional learning framework because we really hope that people will try out some of those activities and give us feedback on how they could be improved, what resources and materials might support them. And then we would go on to a stage of actually piloting the professional learning framework. I tell you all of that really just as a pretext to explain to you why I'm so delighted to be here with these two great panelists to talk about the importance of understanding the evidence about effective professional learning and perhaps getting some insights into how professional learning might help bridge some of those gaps that we heard about this morning between and within schools. So let me introduce our speakers. Maria Hyler is the director of the Learning Policy Institute's Washington, D.C. office and senior researcher in educator quality. She directs the Educator Preparation Laboratory, which is a center on teacher and leader preparation, working for deeper learning and equity and to transform educator preparation through the alignment of research, practice and policy, which is very much what this conference is about. So we're delighted to have you with us, Maria. And Makito Yurita is a professor at the National Institution for School Teachers and Staff Development in Japan. He is also on the board of directors of the Japanese Society for the Study of Teacher Education, where he's also the chief editor of its journal. So you're both very welcome today. In terms of how the session will run, each speaker is going to speak for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have 5 minutes of Q&A for each speaker, so do think about your questions. After we've had presentations from both the speakers and the question and answer session, there'll be some time for you to have some small group discussions on your tables, and I will come back and give you some questions to guide those discussions. But just to set that up at the top of the session, I think it would be really nice if we could reflect on a question that I think my colleagues are going to put up behind me. Can you recall yourself a learning experience that resulted in creative thinking or helped you to transform research into policy and practice? So if you kind of have that thought, that question in the back of your mind as you hear the presentations, we'll come back and we'll talk about what might have supported that process after the sessions. I think that is all that I wanted to say. So all that remains is for me to pass on the stage to Maria. Maria.
Good afternoon. It's so good to be here. We have the after lunch slump, so hopefully you'll be able to have some learning. And I just wanted to say that it was really invigorating to hear the talks this morning. I'm so excited to make some connections, and so I'm going to ask you to be active learners, and as you listen to what I have to share today, that you think about the threads that connect from this morning's content to this afternoon. So I'm coming to you with the perspective of thinking about the types of teachers that we need, given all of the things we talked about this morning, because it's quite a lift if you think about all of the types of learning, the types of curriculum, types of pedagogies that are needed to engage students in creative and critical thinking. So if we're thinking about effective teachers, they must be able to teach more sophisticated thinking and performance skills at this time to more diverse students with a greater range of needs, and I would also say strengths and assets, and all the while redesigning schools to meet 21st century demands. And we think about this, one of the statistics I like to quote from University of California, Berkeley's scholars is that there was more information created between 1999 and 2002 than in the history of the entire world. And knowledge is doubling each year right now. So when we think about our students and the teachers that are teaching them, we have to be able to have teachers teach students who are going to encounter knowledge that has not yet been discovered, engage in technology that hasn't yet been created, and solve problems that we have not yet been able to solve. So when we think about the complexity of teaching and learning, the more complex the practice, the greater the expectations for effectiveness, and the more professional knowledge and skill are needed. So we have great demands on our teachers, and yet our teacher preparation and professional development has not changed significantly over time. So I'm going to just bring in two frameworks to consider, for you to consider over the next few minutes. The first is the science of learning and development, and the second is effective teacher professional development. And I'd like you to think about the ties between the two. So when we think about the science of learning and development, we know that there are particular, over the last several decades, there have been particular disciplines focused on learning. So you have your neuroscience, you have your psychology, of cultural foundations of learning, social sciences. But within the last decade or so, folks have gotten together and really thought about the convergence of the science of learning and development and what does that mean for schools and transforming education. So some of the major learnings we have from the science of learning and development that really help us think about how we create learning environments for students is that the brain and development of intelligence and capacities are malleable across the entire lifespan. So as we sit here, we're continuing to learn, and our intelligence and our capacities are expanding. If there's some neurological things, they can also shrink depending on what's going on in the brain. Our human capacities grow across the developmental spectrum, physical, cognitive, affective, and interactive ways. And so what that means is that the domains influence what happens in each other. So the emotions have physical consequences that can trigger or block learning. So thinking about the cortisol versus the oxytocin and how brain chemistry actually can help to create greater learning, or if there's been trauma, that can actually inhibit. It's almost impossible for students to learn when they're experiencing trauma and they're focused on outside factors in schools, outside factors. So the brain develops as a function of relationships and experiences that activate neural pathways which permit new kinds of thinking, and the kinds of experiences matter greatly. So if we think about teachers who are really focused on the student experience and focused on creating authentic relationships and see students as learners and capable, that's going to be a different experience than a teacher who is coming in and teaching a subject matter and not really paying attention to the students and who they are. And that ties into learning relying both on emotional safety and connections across neurons and with experiences and cultural contexts. And we know, of course, that variability is not the norm, variability is the norm and not the exception. And I think oftentimes when we engage learners, smart equals fast. And we have to be careful about that, because just because a student gets something quickly doesn't mean that they've gotten it deeply. And so we have to think about variability in terms of time, experience, and also depth. So just a few of the major learnings from, excuse me, the science of learning and development. Then in 2019, a group of like-minded organizations, the Science of Learning and Development Alliance, took what was known from the science of learning and development and created a set of design principles, the whole child design principles, that rely on the science of learning and development to think about how do we create learning environments that help students thrive. So really thinking about what we know about learning, what we know about development, what do school and classroom environments need to look like? So the 5 are here: positive developmental relationships. And when we say design, so what types of structures can support that? Looping of classrooms, the advisory system being known by at least one adult in the school, really focusing in on the relationships between teachers and students as well. Environments filled with safety and belonging. And all of these principles are iterative and they interact with one another. So even while I'm talking about them in a very discrete way, they overlap. So environments filled with safety and belonging, a child who feels affirmed in his or her identities or their identities really have the opportunity to learn more deeply than a student that is made to feel like they are less than or unable to learn. So really focusing on identity safe spaces is important for whole child design principles. Rich learning experiences and knowledge development. So some of the project-based learning that was mentioned earlier, which there is a body of research that says project-based learning does help students to learn more deeply and also helps to transfer knowledge. When you engage in project-based learning, it's, you have the ability to transfer that knowledge to unique and novel situations. The development of skills, habits, and mindsets. Those are the ability to analyze, reflect, to engage cognitively, and the ways in which schools can help students engage in that work. And then finally, integrated support systems. We can think about the types of supports around physical, emotional, mental, and cognitive support systems that work together in the academic and community together. So community schools are ways in which we really see integrated support systems show up in effective ways. So we're talking about, if you think about this environment and what that looks like, and thinking about the strands of creativity which are within them, we asked ourselves, well, if this is the type of environment we want, what does teacher preparation, grounded in the science of learning and development, look like? And what connects teacher preparation and professional development is we want the same things, the same types of learning for our teachers that we want them to engage their students in. We want teacher preparation programs to model and to engage in the type of rich, deep learning that we want their candidates to go out and to engage in K-12. And while it seems very intuitive, it's not happening as much as it should. Professors are still giving these types of lectures and telling K-12 students, telling their candidates what to do and not doing it. And so we really wanted to build the capacity of preparation programs to think about how best to serve candidates and prepare teachers for 21st century skills, the creativity, the deeper learning, the critical thinking and problem solving, the innovation, the entrepreneurship, all of those pieces. And so these design principles mirror to a large extent those of the K-12 design principles. The first is the curriculum deeply rooted in an understanding of learners, learning, and development. And this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. A few decades ago, and when it's done poorly today, teachers learned how to teach subjects. I'm going to teach math, I'm going to teach science, but there's an understanding now that teachers teach students a subject. And so really thinking about the triangle of the teacher, the curriculum, and the student, and really understanding the tenets of learning and development. I'm just messing all sorts of things up here. Supportive development, relationships, and communities of practice, and that's communities for the teacher candidates. And what does that mean? That there needs to be authentic reciprocal relationships between teacher preparation programs and districts. There needs to be, oftentimes those are transactional, but there needs to be a partnership where teacher candidates, teacher preparation programs work with families and community members to design what types of teachers they want and need in their schools. That takes time and resources, and it's a great policy lever to create change in our schools. For our candidates, we want rich experiential learning opportunities for them as well, not sit and get. We want them to go out in the communities. We want them to engage in the same activities that they're teaching their K-12 students. The development of skills, habits, and mindsets. I'm an equitable educator. When we think about those, we think about the work that candidates need to do internally, about their own positionality, the way that they were brought up. One of the ways that this shows up in particular is that students in classrooms might be creative in their answers that are culturally based, and teachers aren't able to see the learning. So for instance, there was a study that focused on a mathematical question that asked, which is more economical, to buy a day pass or a week pass? And the correct mathematical answer was a day pass, but the students in the classroom responded a week pass because they could share it with their friends and family members. And if you're not aware of that norm in a family or a community, you're just going to say the student doesn't know mathematics. But in fact, they're engaging in deep learning, but the teacher's not able to recognize that. So really thinking about cultural ways of knowing, understanding the diversity of your students, the backgrounds, understanding your own positionality, how the social, political, economic context impacts the way that you view students, schooling, and really doing deep work around that. And then the final is pedagogical alignment and modeling. So preparation programs need to have a clear vision and mission around what teacher preparation looks like, and then the structures and the processes to enact that. So making sure that instructors, supervisors, coaches, mentor teachers are all on the same page, and that all of those folks are modeling the type of interactions and learning that we want to see our teachers engage in with their students. All right, I have about 6 minutes to talk to you about professional development now. And as we transfer from pre-service teacher preparation to in-service professional development, I'd like you to think about how effective elements of professional development found in this study reflect or don't reflect or expand upon what I just shared around the science of learning and development. So some active listening, some active learning. So this comes out of a study we did in 2016. We looked at some studies that were methodologically rigorous and that focused on positive link between teacher, PD, and student outcomes. Of course, there were a lot more studies that we looked at, but we could only find 35 that looked at the outcomes. And so what traditional PD looks like this. It's sit and get, drive by, it's a one-time thing. One size fits all. It's often disconnected from teachers and classrooms. And what we saw in the effective PD was a shift to content-focused, active, collaborative, some of the same work that we heard from Mickey, the use of modeling, coaching, feedback, and reflection, and sustained over time. So I'm going to quickly run through these to make sure we have some time for questions. How much time do I have about? Okay, so run through. So content focused, really job embedded and focused specifically on a curriculum or a unit or a lesson that a teacher uses with their student. Active learning, we got some of that with Mickey. And this is the how, these next 6, and the first is the what. Collaboration, so the interactive teaching should not be a solo endeavor. So effective professional development is collaborative in small learning communities or one-on-one or coaching. Effective professional development provides models of effective practice. And those models could be lesson plans, unit plans, sample of student work, and also thinking about observations of expert teachers and accomplished teachers is really important because a teacher needs to see what that vision of accomplished teaching looks like, whether it be in the materials or on the actual pedagogy, because you can't be what you can't see, right? Coaching and expert support, this could be one-on-one, small groups, but it's really about, and hopefully it's a teacher in the same context, but this type of focused support gives time for feedback, reflection, and iterations of practice. Feedback and reflection often occurs in coaching, but it can be external to coaching as well. And just having time for teachers to think about the work that they're doing, the students that they're working, and getting feedback on that. Finally, there's no magic number of professional development, but we do know that it needs to be sustained over time. So a teacher cannot get a workshop on how to teach creative thinking or creativity, and then they're expected to do it. It needs to be iterative over a series of time. And I just want to leave you with the thought, if creativity and creative thinking is what we want for our students, we need to design learning experiences for teachers that inspires and excite them for this work. Thank you, and sorry I rushed at the end.
Thank you, Maria. That was really interesting and a really good kind of basis of what constitutes effective professional learning. We have a few minutes for question and answer. Does anyone have a question for Maria? Over here. The mic is just coming to you.
Thank you. Maria, a really excellent presentation, just from beginning to end. Particularly, it reminds me of an engagement by Daniel Ansari in an OECD conference in Brussels some years ago, and it was the early stages of mind-brain education science, and the idea of different disciplines coming together to work for, and I mean, the fact that it's ground, I was looking at some of the PowerPoints on your website. I think my question, so I'm incredibly excited about what you've described. Welcome back to my Irish colleague's question before lunch. The idea, what's your experience so far in scaling this in systems at even state level in the States, if not federal level, or other jurisdictions around the world? Because I think the whole integration of design principles, which is coming to the civil service in Ireland more and more, the focus on the whole child is very much at the fore in our policy space as well. So a lot of really exciting developments coming together here, but how do we actually keep our eye on the prize here? Thanks.
Yeah, so when when Cassie introduced me, I direct Ed Prep Lab, and what we do, as she said, was research, practice, and policy. So the work that we're doing is we have 27 teacher and leader preparation programs in a community, and a lot of them doing really innovative work. And so what we do is we lift up that work to the field and also to policymakers. And another part of the work is our teacher licensure collaborative, and that is our policy arm, and our policy advisors are working with states who are interested in changing their standards and licensure requirements to be more aligned with the science of learning and development. So we're trying to go from bottom up with practitioners and the things that they're doing, and top down with supporting policies that advance this type of work and align what's required for licensure so that oversubscribed curriculum can be cut back and really focus on the things that matter for teaching and learning.
Any more questions?
May I? I'm over here.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Hello.
Go ahead. Hello.
Thank you for a very provocative presentation today. I want to try to tie in the two halves of this conference and also look at the research influencing policy piece that you just spoke about. Help me understand, has the research been used to inform your framework, or has the research now in place to test the framework in these partner organizations so that there's active evidence about the efficacy of the framework, or are both things happening? Thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely a cycle. We started with the research to create the framework, and what we see in our programs in the network are that a lot of the practices they engage in are aligned with science of learning and development, but they don't necessarily call it that, and now they have a framework with which to measure themselves and their practice against. And it's a great framework for policy makers to understand what it takes to create teachers that are this effective. And so it gives a vision of what that looks like. And also the effective PD has been used in a lot of policy at the federal level and state level as well, in terms of language around what's effective professional development and how to get funding as well.
Thank you very much, Maria. I think we need to move on to our next speaker, but thank you. Please join me in a round of applause for Maria.
Should I just start? All right. Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. I come from a different background. I don't have a degree in education. I come from a completely different background. I usually do the discourse analysis. So it was very nice that you mentioned about variability. It's not a norm. It's a norm. It's a norm. I'm sorry. It's a norm. And that exactly covers with what I'm going to talk about in my presentation too. So we've been discussing about enacting creative classroom and research evidence to support the teachers to promote creative thinking in practice. But if we continue asking teachers to make changes to their practice as a means to cope with changes in the society, we must pay teachers a lot better. That's what we all agree, I'm sure. But unfortunately, the Ministry of Finance may have a different idea. And also, unfortunately, the public won't support it. Yet still, that there is a need to make changes to our education. And the teachers are key players. And they are at the forefront of transforming our education. So we must keep in mind of these conditions teachers are facing today when we're discussing about teacher professional learning and also the policies on teachers and the teaching profession. So this presentation, this is the one to move? This one, right? Yeah. So this presentation has two key takeaways. One is about the importance of ensuring the fairness in the production and the teachers' use of research evidence. And the second is about understanding the teacher's sense of professionalism to inquire teacher readiness and also even their willingness to make changes to their practice. These points are interlinked, but the link between them are not necessarily self-explanatory, so let me try to elaborate in this presentation as much as I can. And what I couldn't, let's hope that we can have a little discussion to make for the further clarification. The first thing is about fairness. There's a dominant discourse in education policy, particularly for the last 25 years, has been centered around the production and the use of systematic research evidence. Its approach is very valuable, and it's brought many changes to how we practice education and making education policy today. But at the same time, it works in favor of the political and economic mainstreams, because the production of such evidence costs a lot, and therefore the access to the production is exclusive to the mainstream. Of course, minorities and underprivileged people can produce their own evidence, but their research evidence is not necessarily competitive with those produced by the mainstream. As such, that minorities face a lack of fair representation in the systematic research evidence to a degree. And also, they may kept into the variables. For example, under the current frame of assessment and accreditation, creative classroom might ask underprivileged group of people to take a greater risk than their peers, who may have more room to make mistakes. Therefore, it is essential for teachers to undergo professional learning and strengthen their understanding and sensitivity beyond the classroom to use the research evidence as a means to effectively integrate local variables into practice. To further clarify this point, that I must call your attention that the types of the goals that we assign for public schooling determine what evidence we value and how we use it, as well as how we view the work of teachers. The policies prioritizing systematic research evidence are built on economic efficiency goal of public schooling, which is represented in the normal distribution graph, in the leftmost normal distribution graph. So the success and the failure of education is measured by efficiency when improving the system performance. The public and the media also takes on this goal. For example, when reporting a PISA result, like today, that the emphasis is made on the scores, changes of scores, and the league tables to understand and compare the success and the failure of education systems and their challenges, and also accomplishment. Another policy approach focuses on narrowing the performance gap. This approach aims for the egalitarian equality goal, which is the middle one. It aims to narrow the learning gap and provide an equal learning experience for all the learners. Yet the progress is still measured by the change in the value of the standard deviation as well. Then, the egalitarian equity goal, which is a rightmost one, egalitarian equity goal focuses on the growth of all learners at diverse range, and views the system level performance as a welcoming byproduct. Improvement of the system performance and narrowing the performance gap are not the goals themselves, but the indicators for policymakers and the teachers to reflect on the current state of practice. This economic efficiency goal set teachers as instruments to disseminate policies and the practices that would work. It tends to position teachers as users or consumers of research evidence. As such, that the emphasis is made on professional development. Somebody develops a teacher, basically, to build the knowledge and the skills that are useful to increase efficiency in practice. However, the equity goal positions the teacher to be more than an instrument. To ensure equity in practice, teachers must act as a specialist of local variables. And thus, when approaching to policies and researching evidence, teachers first learn and understand them, then interpret those policies and research evidence with the local variables in the context of practice. Then also, teachers would encode their local experiences to share with the communities, which would then contribute to building the knowledge of practice. Then such knowledge is communicated with communities extrinsic to teachers, such as the researchers and the policymakers. This whole process construes the professionalism of teachers. While knowledge and the skills are very important, and it is important property for teachers' practice. However, those properties do not measure the level of professionalism. Professional development sets its focus on transmitting the properties to teachers. But professional learning is about building the space and community that are productive in shaping the knowledge of practice. And therefore, designing a professional learning is about giving teachers the opportunity to encode their local experience, to offer the space for sharing their expertise in working with variables, and coordinating to form an abstract knowledge of practice. And this knowledge must be co-constructive, and it is informing about local variables within and across different stakeholders. In other words, that we need to set the professional learning differently from professional development. Professional learning is an ongoing research practice of its own, in which teachers take a vital role in providing information on local variables and inviting other stakeholders to use the built knowledge to better respond to the fast-changing complex reality in practice. So the second point is what is the state of the teachers then today? What is the state of teachers' professionalism? I took the survey in 2 prefectures in Japan. Samples were stratified by years of experience, and from the population of approximately 20,000 teachers in each prefecture. This 4-quadrant diagram is the output of the correspondence analysis of the teachers' years of experience and the categories generated from teachers' written responses on 3 most important areas of their learning needs. This survey outcomes shows a worrying pattern of teachers' perception of professional learning needs and the state of the teacher professionalism in Japan. The good news is that teachers are committed to their classroom teaching and the teaching of their subject. They express interest in developing their knowledge and skills and competencies. The concerns are, however, the teacher's interest area shows almost no change in the years of experience. This trend is more obvious in another prefecture. That stage 1 is entrant teachers, and it's basically stay in the same areas. So teachers show the interest in learning that is directly relevant to their narrow classroom and their narrow subject areas of which they teach. We can generate 2 hypotheses. One is that teachers' learning interest is limited to the field where they have a sense of decision-making authority, such as their own classroom and their own subject, that they teach. And the teacher's professionalism, second point is the teacher's professionalism and the professional growth do not correlate the years of experience teachers have, which is contrary to the popular assumption of the linear progression model of the teacher development. These concerns pose a major challenge to the current discussion on professional development and professional learning and the use of research evidence in practice. Let's take, for example, about promoting teachers' use of research evidence for creativity and creative thinking. We have teachers who are likely to be able to gain skills to use the research evidence from having excellent professional development and professional learning programs. Yet their practice in reality would likely be contained within a narrow classroom or the subjects they teach. Creativity will be fragmented, and creativity will be contained within their own classroom practice. We must address the current fragmented state of the teachers and the teaching profession. Especially when we discuss about teacher professional learning, we have to differentiate it from teacher professional development. In order to ensure the meaningful learning and empower teachers to be the agent to address variables in the discourse of education and its evidence production process and its use. This will be the conclusion of my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Makito. I think that was a very useful reminder that we can't just turn to professional learning without considering a whole range of factors. I was particularly struck by the sort of idea that professional learning might actually function to ingrain perceptions rather than necessarily transform them. So we have a few minutes for questions and answers. Does anybody have a question for Makito?
Maybe I explained it very clearly.
Well, whilst you're thinking, perhaps I can ask you, you ended by saying we need to address the fragmentation of the teaching profession and professional learning. I wondered if you had any ideas about how we might do that.
How we might do that? Today that we are in the morning that we discuss about creative thinking, making a creative classroom. A lot of the discourse that we are talking about is, on the basis of the, strong optimism. Teachers are waiting, students are also waiting. Everybody is wanting to do that. But in fact, that the data and the research and also discourse analysis shows there's a lot of resentment. And also creative classroom may hinder the opportunity for the students who are trying to excel from the bottom strata of society. Because for them, it's taking a creative classroom, creative learning, comes at a risk of failing the accreditation process. The same things happen to the teachers. Teachers working in those environments always facing a dilemma of parents' pressures, dilemma of local needs, and dilemma between national requirement and accountability that they have to face. When we're discussing about the policies and the practice of the teachers and teacher professional development, we really have to try to invite the teacher not as a learners of the better practice or the better use of research, but we have to invite them as a researcher that specialize in the field knowledge, specialize in the variables in the field, which is very difficult for us to get information from. So this is the kind of approach that we are trying to do in Japan, to use the evidence to create a dialogue with the teachers and also with other stakeholders, policymakers, teachers, researchers, communities, using the same evidence, try to interpret this evidence so we can get a different idea from the field idea, from the research idea. So in this way that we are trying to bridge that to make a professional development into professional learning. Very small practice, but still it seems effective. Thank you.
Thank you. I see we have a question. Can I just turn to you, though, Maria, very quickly and ask if you have some thoughts or some responses to what Makito has said?
Sure. It actually made me think about when you were talking about the communities working together with teachers and stakeholders and students, that 2 high school students in New Orleans solved the Pythagorean theorem. Did you see that on the news? And they solved it using trigonometry. And there were not mathematical wizards that were in a school that had to be rebuilt after Hurricane Katrina. 2 African-American girls who were in the type of learning environment that I explained, with teachers who believed, when they asked the teachers, were you surprised? They said no, because we teach our students that they can do anything. And I thought that was so powerful. And I think that when we create those learning environments and teachers can engage in the ways that we were talking in the professional learning looks like that, it really, anything is possible. So I was really excited about that.
Thank you. So, yeah, a question.
Hi, I'm Salma. Apologies, I'm Salma. I'm here representing the World Innovation Summit for Education, which is a think tank arm of Qatar Foundation. And just a reflection on many of the interventions that we heard today. In many settings where I've worked, I'm reflecting on to what extent are we integrating the critical thinking and the creativity, not just as part of teacher professional development, but as part of teacher pre-service training. And I'm assuming here many of us have worked with educators, practitioners, and policymakers, because this is the goal of the conference. And in some of the settings where I worked, the teacher pre-service training with the pre-service is not updated. It's only updated every 10 years. So we are talking about these skills that teachers need to be, we need to build teachers' capacity in teaching and conveying these knowledges and skills. But at the same time, we might have to go and look at the roots. We know that teachers are overwhelmed. We know that like professional development usually comes down to like lack of resources and lack of time, right? So I would love to hear from some of you here, like, have you seen case studies or examples of success where actually some of these 2 skills that we are discussing today have been integrated into the teacher pre-service before talking about the in-service trainings?
I used to, about 7 years, until 7 years ago, I was doing a teacher preparation program. In Japanese teacher preparation program is highly structured, and students go through the whole curriculum. We introduced, so basically it's emphasized in the development stage. The program that focuses on the development has a clear exit. Basically, they're getting a certificate. That's the clear exit. So those kind of learning, the development approach works. But after they become the teacher, they lost the creativity, they lost the critical thinking. So what we introduced is to create a curriculum that introduces the critical pedagogy within a part of the curriculum program. Many students who try to become a teacher loves teaching, loves to become a teacher. Otherwise, they don't come into the professional teaching because the pay is lousy. And but they try to become a teacher, so they love schools, but we are trying to present a lot of research data, information about the negative impact of schooling, negative impact of teaching, as evidence, and using that evidence to create a dialogue across with them, to deconstruct the belief, but not only just reconstructing, but reconstructing their belief again. So this is a kind of risky approach that people thought. And we had a survey, and we studied about the impact of it. But I don't have the data right now, but it was proven effective in terms of reinstating more mission of becoming a teacher. Not just teaching the subject, but becoming a mission to become more equal, to do a more equitable teaching, and more to become a teacher as a citizen kind of approach. So this is a kind of development approach. And so that's why whenever we discuss about these sort of issues, I think we have to differentiate clearly about the development and learning. And when we are talking about professional learning, we really have to invite teachers as a researcher, into the research community. And when we're talking about the development, we can talk about it in a way that what works, what research evidence is useful, and create a dialogue on how you can practice research, how you can become a researcher. So if I'm answering your question right, I think this is my 2 cents. I don't know how to call that.
2 cents, yeah.
Can I give 2 cents?
Yeah, of course.
So that's my area of expertise is teacher preparation, pre-service teacher learning. And the second wheel that I showed was all about the design of teacher preparation programs. But I do encourage you to go to edpreplab.org, which is our website. And we do site visits to preparation programs to show how they're doing innovative work. There are curricular materials, so syllabi and signature assessments. And it's really a great resource for preparation programs that are thinking about what does it mean to prepare teachers for deeper learning. And that's actually the name of the book that we published out of a study looking at 7 exemplary teacher preparation programs in the United States that were preparing teachers for deeper learning. So there's lots of resources.
Well, thank you very much. I want to leave some time for some small group discussions on the table. So please join me in a round of applause for Makito. So we're going to have some time for small group discussions now. And if you go to the next slide, there are some questions to guide those discussions. We don't have moderators on the table, so I ask you all to be self-moderating. But if you could designate a scribe, and perhaps that scribe could take some notes. At the end of 15 or 20 minutes, 15 minutes, we will come back together and I will just ask for 1 or 2 insights from across the room. We won't have time to go through each table in turn. But the kind of questions for your kind of reflection and discussion. So I asked you at the top of the session to think about an example of a professional learning experience that you yourself have had. So what structures, systems, or norms facilitated that creative thinking or translation of research into policy and practice? And how could the research that you've heard about today be translated into policy and practice in your own contexts? And what structures, systems, and norms might support that? And on the basis of what you've heard and discussed today, what's one action that you could take in your context to embed creative thinking into initial teacher education and professional learning? So over to you in your small tables. You have 15 minutes to talk with each other, and then we'll come back together for some insights. So thank you. Can I invite you all to come back together? I'm so sorry to interrupt your conversations. I'll give you a few seconds to finish your thoughts. Okay. Bringing out my teacher tools. So thank you all for your engagement in that discussion. You were obviously in the middle of some really interesting thoughts and ideas, and I really encourage you to continue that during the coffee break and during the next session and tomorrow. I think it would be nice if we could have a few insights from your conversations. So I wonder if anyone would want to share just one insight that they've gained from the conversation. And I will pick on you if you, Nora.
Thank you. So we had a conversation about the school leader's role as an important element in facilitating professional learning and creating those norms and also structures within a school that allow for professional learning. And then we said that accountability mechanisms in most countries currently reward more traditional forms, probably less sort of the creative classroom direction. And this is also because traditional outcomes, academic outcomes, are easier to measure and cheaper to measure. So we probably need to move towards more holistic outcome measures, which requires resources. And then an important idea that came out from the conversation is a way towards teacher professionalism would be to invite teachers in the research community, which does not necessarily mean that they have to conduct research from A to Z, but being part of the process of production. And then this would be also a way to provide a more intellectually stimulating professional environment for them.
Thank you. Yes, so going back to Makito's point about fairness in the production and use of evidence in education, and then also pointing to the importance of whole school approaches, which I know Bill and other people work on a lot. So let's go over there to the table over there, and then we'll come to the table in the middle.
Okay, just one quick thing that came from our group. We tried to get into number 2. How could research you've heard about be translated? And I guess where we got to was actually what we really need to do is stand back and say, for whom is a lack of creativity a problem? So like, what's the problem might drive it, rather than pushing the research out, thinking about what problem might bring people to this research. And it's going to be very different systems.
Thank you. And in the middle?
So threading across the 3 questions, one of the factors we felt in our experience that was conducive to good creativity and learning was the importance of good space and time for good conversations to debrief and reflect on the learning. Based on that, we said the translation to policy and practice, and this is kind of the many other points, but just threading this one through. The translation, one good example would be the importance of big conversations involving parents, teachers, children, young people, to foster space and time for the sharing of new methods. Everyone's a different perspective on the system currently, and so we come with the best of intentions, but it gets lost between the cracks of the system works fine as it is for most people, but not for all. And therefore, our key action for from today in context is to start a national conversation on the future of education to create that conducive environment for creativity in the system.
Wow, thank you. That's wonderful. One last insight, Bill.
Thanks so much. I'm sure we can't have even the beginnings of these conversations unless we're prepared to answer and ask the question, what's the point of school? What's the point of education? I'm sure that's good. Once you told us to get on with the task, which we were enjoying too much, we tried to answer number 3, and we just wondered whether luckily we have Todd Lubart here on the table, and he is the World Global President, or some good title, for the International Society for the Study of Creativity and Innovation. And we wondered if we could take, an extended group of a lot of us, the fantastic resource that is the report that you've produced, and then get under the surface of it a little bit and see where we think there's growing understanding, where we think there are research holes, where there are interesting questions, and then kind of be a kind of translating support body for you to see if we could then encourage our colleagues to go deeper and possibly bring some resource in to investigate those kind of things, like that really interesting thing about the gender differences and understanding the kind of creative self-efficacy issues, the parent issues, all those issues that we were just kind of scraping the surface on. So we honestly did get on with your task towards the end.
Thank you, Bill. Well, I think that is all we have time for, and I won't finish with my own insights because there have been so many that I wouldn't be able to choose one. But I think that there are some really important questions being asked here today. And as I said, I really encourage you to continue those conversations over the rest of the conference. So all that remains for me to do is to thank again our two speakers, Maria and Makito. And if you could just join me in one last round of applause. Thank you.